And right now we're going through SAT Test 5, Section 2. And we're in question number 8. Question number 8 is about transition words. And for transition words, our one-liner is to invent your own transition word, because what it does is it forces you to really read it. A lot of times we think we're reading it, but there are really so many sort of competing things on our minds that you'd be surprised at how little we're actually reading or actually comprehending what's going on. But if I ask you to invent your own word, then you will, in fact, go ahead and make a lot more sense of what it is that you're reading. So just going to kind of clip in the other part of this paragraph here so we can see them side by side. Toughest part of a tutor's job is getting everything to show up on one screen, if you ask me. Okay, so what's the transition? Because CT scanners can map objects that are impossible to excavate, scanning and printing can also be used to reproduce fossils that scientists can't observe firsthand. Researchers from the National Museum of Brazil have relied on this technique. So what's happening? We have an idea of what can be done. The scanning and printing can be used to reproduce fossils, right? But in the next sentence, we see that researchers in some particular place have relied on this technique. So we have an idea, and then we have an example of that idea. So of course, we're going to want for example to be our transitional phrase here. And very lucky for us, that exactly coincides with choice D for number 8. So now we're going on to question 9 here. And once again, we have another one of these situations where the paragraph is broken up over 2 areas. Just 1 second. Okay, that took a little longer than usual. Because CT scanners can map objects that are impossible to excavate, CT scanning and 3D printing can also be used to reproduce fossils that scientists can't observe firsthand. For example, researchers from the National Museum of Brazil. Okay, so we hinted at the string of nouns joined by prepositions, but here we're definitely seeing it. A string of nouns joined by prepositions. And before we get into details about what exactly this is, we'll just sort of give you the one-liner, the little thing about this that should be committed to your memory. So the rule in this situation is judge singularity and plurality by the first noun in the string. So that's our rule. And now let's get a little more into what we're talking about here. A preposition, prepositions tell us the relationship between different nouns. And usually those relationships have to do with location, but relationships can be really complex. For instance, something can be the owner of something else. Something can be in charge of something else. Something can be something else's cousin, or someone can be someone else's cousin. There could be a variety of ways that two nouns will relate to one another. But we want to be able to identify this. So how does this relate to this question? The question says, researchers from the National Museum of Brazil, right? So the preposition is from. These are researchers. Those researchers came from the National Museum of Brazil. Our rule is we're going to judge singularity and plurality by the first noun in the string, which is the plural word researchers, right? So now you can see how valuable this is, because if you're not familiar with this rule, you might judge, and I think most people unconsciously would judge singularity and plurality by the second noun, the National Museum. That's singular. So once I decide whether it's singular or plural, in this case, plural, then you can go off to the side and say, well, one thing relies. Actually, let's go ahead and do it in the past tense like they're doing here. So one thing relied on something, and multiple things. Actually, let's do it in the present tense. One thing relies on something, and multiple things rely on something. So notice how much the word rely changes based on whether it's singular or plural. So we said it was plural. So we want rely in that sense. We don't want has, because it's another one. One thing has, and multiple things have. So once we're sure that we're operating in the plural sense, then we can conjugate lots of words based on that. So because it's plural, we wouldn't say has. One thing has, multiple things have, and we're talking about multiple things. We're plural. Or researchers relied. That would be okay. Multiple researchers could have relied. Researchers will rely. If we're in the future, that would actually be okay. But then for choice D, researchers is relying. So now, once again, why are we using the word researchers as the word that we're using to make our decision? Because we're judging singularity and plurality by the very first noun in the string. So now when we have it down to choice B and C, we're basically just judging based on whether it's past, present, or future tense. So let's try to gauge that from our reading. Because the scanners can map objects in the present tense, this can also be used to reproduce fossils in the present tense. For example, now we're giving an example. An example is going to be something that probably happened in the past. The researchers probably did this technique to study a fossilized skeleton that was discovered protruding from a rock. So right there in orange, we're seeing our word that is telling us that this example is not something that's being described as something that happens, that's happening right now, but instead is being used to describe something that happened in the past. The researchers relied on this technique to study a skeleton that was discovered. So then that's our past tense, and the answer for number 9 is going to be B. Now, number 10 is perhaps our most involved one-liner. It's the question about effectively combining two sentences. So what's happening with this question type is that if we're being asked, how do we effectively combine two sentences on the SAT, there really are a variety of things that they could be asking us, and they're all being asked using the same words. So like in other words, we don't know if this question is going to be asking us about the flow, the transitional words, the word order, or restarting. But let's go through what those 4 things are. We want things to flow. We want things to be concise. So if you just read it and just sounds absolutely terrible, then you could say it has bad flow. Transition words would be words like however, furthermore, moreover, in addition, for example, like we just saw a moment ago. So those are transitional words, and you want transitional words and punctuation like colon, semicolon, or long dash that fit the situation properly. Word order is a little less common, but is important to the SAT. Occasionally, the right words will be there with the wrong order, and it'll render an answer choice incorrect. And restarting is very important because it's the most common one. Restarting kind of sounds like the way a first grader would write. School is fun. It is my favorite place. Or researchers did this. They did it because. So it might be a little different than repeating. Maybe not necessarily always repeating the same word, but sort of starting an idea over when it would have made more sense to just continue the same idea. So let's go ahead and read this situation and see what they were talking about. So the researchers relied on this technique to study a skeleton that was discovered protruding from a rock at a railroad site. The fossil was too delicate to be removed from the rock. Because of the fossil's delicate nature, the team dug up a block of stone. So I would say that the original one, which we're not really being offered as a choice, is actually repeating and restarting. It's kind of giving us, it's almost like if I turn off the engine on a car and just restart it. Well, what's the point of that? It would have just been better if I just kept the engine running the whole time, right? So now let's look at the answer choices. The fossil could not be removed from the rock on account of it being too delicate. Moreover, the team dug up a block of stone around it. So there are a lot of things wrong with this, but moreover is maybe the biggest one. Because when would you use moreover or furthermore? Those are transitional words that essentially mean in addition. So if I were giving you a lot of reasons why you should buy me a new Corvette, I would say reason number one is this, reason number two is that. Moreover, reason number three is the other thing. So it's not an in addition kind of situation, like a bunch of reasons for something. So therefore, I would say A is wrong because of the word moreover, in addition to some other more subtle things. Choice B, the team thought the fossil was too delicate to remove from the rock. And their next decision was, well, I would maybe consider that wordy and say it comes down to flow right there for choice D. So if they thought this and they did that, it's kind of implied that the next thing we're talking about is their next decision, because they thought this and their next decision was that. So here I would say there's elements of repetitiveness and also elements of restarting and bad transitions. So choice B is out for a lot of reasons. It's doesn't flow, is very wordy. There are a lot of ways to write the same thing with less words. Looking at choice D now, the fossil was too delicate to be removed from the rock, so the team dug up a block of stone around the fossil and brought it to the lab. So notice how here they're telling us the decisions without saying the decision was to do this. The word so accomplishes that with so much less space. So far, I like choice C a lot for question number 10. So let's leave it alone for now. And choice D. In removing the fossil from the rock, the team found it was too delicate. Semicolon. Then they dug up a block of stone around the fossil and brought it to their lab. So I might consider this more than anything the idea of restarting. So why do we need to put a semicolon and then say the next step if it was one continuum? So this is kind of the idea of restarting. They did this, then they did that. Whereas really it was kind of one big continuity. So the answer for number 10 is going to be choice C. Going on to number 11 now. Examining the model, researchers determined that it had found a new species. Or, okay, now that I understand what they're talking about, examining the model, the researchers determined that they had found a new species, because it wasn't the model that found the species, it was the researchers. So examining the model, researchers determined that they had found a new species. So we're talking about a pronoun that renames the word researchers. So if I mention researchers and I want to refer to them again, what am I going to call them the second time? I'm going to call them they. So the answer to number 11 is going to be C. Number 12 now. Stop them pictures. Legend has it that the corrupt politician William Boss Tweed once used those words when ordering someone to offer a bribe to an artist who had become famous for cartoons that called for reforms to end corruption. As a result, okay, so here we're seeing our transition words. And transition, I'm just digging up the one-liner for transition words. And the one-liner for transition words, as you're seeing here, is to invent your own transition words. And like we said before, what that does is it forces you to read more comprehensively than maybe you would. Now, just think about, why is it that people often would not really truly read or comprehend what they're reading here? Ironically, it's because we have the answer choices staring us in the face. So what happens is people go so quickly into trying to pick the best answer that they kind of fail to realize that they haven't really truly understood what they're reading yet. So a lot of our one-liners are kind of designed to slow you down at the moment that you need to be slowed down. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing that he used these words when he was going to have someone offer a bribe to an artist who had these cartoons about corruption. Tweed's attempt to silence the artist failed, and the cartoons actually played a key role in bringing him to justice. So I might say, if I were inventing my own word, I might say next. The offers to the attempts to silence the artist failed. So in my own words, I'll say next. So now, looking at A, did the results fail because, did the attempt fail because he attempted to order a bribe? That doesn't really make sense, because as a result is a cause and effect word, like therefore. As a result of this, this happened. And the failure was not because he offered a bribe. It was maybe because of some other reason why it failed. Therefore is another cause and effect word. So A and B are both cause and effect words. We would use those in situations where this happened because the other thing happened. So I hit my head because I wasn't looking where I was going, or I wasn't looking where I was going. Therefore, or as a result, I hit my head. Okay, furthermore is our in addition word. And like we said a little while ago, that kind of word would be used if I were giving you a bunch of reasons why you should do something. And for my last most powerful reason, I would say furthermore or in summary. So it's just not for this situation. And so although none of the words said what I wanted, which is next, deleting it does actually work. Because they gave us one event and then they gave us another event. So it's implied that the next thing they mention is the next event. So, like we say, answering in your own words still works very frequently, even in situations where what you answered is slightly different than what the question had in mind, because in the process of answering in your own words, you're making sure that you're truly comprehending what you're doing. And from having worked with so many students in the past, we know that a lot of times when we're answering the question incorrectly, it's because we just never took the time to really truly understand what was being said. And like I said, that's what our one-liners try to force us to do. So we're going to go ahead and stop for a little while, but we'll be back live shortly, going ahead and continuing through with SAT Test 5, Section 2, and we'll be starting next time at question 13. We definitely hope to have you along.